Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. This time I'm going to be demonstrating how I go about painting Space Wolves pelts, but these same techniques could also be used to paint other fur and hair on your miniatures. On this pelt I've gone for a dark brown to a light cream transition, using some nice warm complementary browns in between. And to do this I started off with a base coat of Ushabti bone. This was painted around halfway to 2/3 up the pelt to ensure that I have enough space for the transitions. And this paint is thinned down with water and applied over a couple of coats. Above this, I then painted some Xandri dust to start to darken the colour and add some slight yellow-brown tones. Now this paint covers really well because it's a base coat, but you could also use a selection of other yellowy browns like Baylor Brown, Zimisi Desert or even XV88. Once I had a layer of this above the Ushabti bone, I then thinned down some of this Xandri dust and used this to create some soft shading in the lighter section. Next, I started to add a warmer brown into the top of the pelt using some Mournfang brown, and to help smooth the transition here, I added this into the Xandri dust to begin with. And the same as before, I thinned some of this mix down and used it to add some softer shading into the Xandri area. I then continued to shade towards the top of the pelt using pure Mournfang brown. For the next stage I used Rhinox hide, and I reserved this just for the very top of the pelt and also the leather area. I then added some shading around this Rhinox area by adding a tiny touch of black paint into the Rhinox. So now with the dark to light transitions created on the pelt, it's time to do an all over shade of Reikland Flesh Shade, and this is just going to help provide some deeper shading on the lighter areas and also help to tie all of those colours together. And I don't want to go too heavy with this, especially on the lighter areas, so I make sure to thin this down with some water, and I'm just carefully targeting the recesses with the brush. I've also added a touch of AK Ultra Matte into this wash, just to guarantee that I end up with a matte finish on these shaded areas. Now it was time to highlight the fur, and I'm essentially going to work backwards with this, starting on the darker areas at the top, and this was first highlighted using Mournfang brown. I then started to add some Xandri dust into this for the finer highlights. I then added increasing amounts of Xandri dust into this for the highlights, working my way down the pelt. I then added a final sharp highlight on the darker sections of fur by adding some Ushabti bone into the mix. Further sharp highlights were then added to the cream areas of the pelt simply by adding white into the Ushabti bone. You could also use something like Screaming Skull for this step. I also used this same mix to add a few small dot highlights onto the darker areas, but taking care to add this very sparingly. Finally, I made a few small tweaks on the fur with some careful glazes of Reikland Flesh Shade. This was applied in a few places just to help tie all of the highlights together and help add a bit of warmth back into the midtones. Now onto the leather section, and for this I first applied a base coat of Bugman's Glow. I really like using a nice warm flesh tone for this, or even a really dark red, as it stands out against the fur and also works really well to complement the blue armour. Once that was done, I then added some shading using a thinned down mix of Corn Red and Doomball Brown, carefully glazing this into the recesses and the contours of the leather. This was then highlighted by adding Rakarth Flesh into the Bugman's Glow. If you're not too keen on using Rakarth Flesh, then you could instead opt to use a mix of Cadian Flesh Tone and Administratum Grey, and it's not going to result in exactly the same tone, but it would still work well to add some highlights. Final sharp highlights on the leather were then made by adding some Administratum Grey into the Rakarth mix. And that's about it for the pelt. In the next video on the Space Wolf, I'll continue with the remaining parts of the miniature. As always, a massive thank you for watching and supporting my content, and I'll catch you in the next video.